Many of you met our guest tonight several months ago when you came and wrote a letter in the Torah scrolls, and we have some of your pictures here. You met Rabbi Akiva Weingarten as a sofer, as a scribe. Tonight, we are going to get to know him as a rabbi with probably the most fascinating biography of any rabbi, I think, today. And I don't want to say anything about it because that's going to be your talk tonight. He just arrived from Germany, fought the Miami traffic, and prevailed. Thank you for being with us tonight. Please come up and share with us your most fascinating story.
Shabbat Shalom. So lovely to see so many of you today here. As the Rabbi mentioned before, this week we read Parashat Bishalach. Parashat Bishalach is when the Israelites finally get to leave Egypt, and the whole biblical story before this parasha is building up to this moment. The patriarchs, the matriarchs, the story with Joseph and his brothers, the covenant between Abram and God, Jacob and God. Everything is leading up to this moment where God told Abraham, your descendants will be enslaved, originally 400 years. According to the calculation that we have in the Bible, it's more than 210 years. The plagues, everything with the Egyptians. And then this leads up to this mystical moment where the Israelites, after almost a year of plagues that the Egyptians suffered, the Israelites get to leave Egypt in this wonderful partition of the sea, and the whole world is talking about it, right? We have in the Parashat Yitro a few portions in next parashat. Vayishma Yitro choten Moshe kohen Midian. Right? Yitro heard, he's living in Midian, a different area. Rashi says on the spot, Ma shmua shama uva, what did he hear? Yitziat Mitzrayim. The whole world is talking about this. There's a group of enslaved people coming out of slavery, and the sea opens for them, literally. And this, of course, is the beginning of our story as a people. My story, as the Rabbi mentioned before, is a bit different. As the common Jewish story, I grew up in the ultra-Orthodox, Satmar Hasidic, anti-Zionist community in Monsey, New York. My grandfather and father are Dayanim, which is rabbinical judges. And the whole family is very ultra-Orthodox. Now, I give often talks about what it means to grow up in the ultra-Orthodox world. And I like to emphasize that this is also, I wrote a book about my life story. And in the introduction I wrote that this is not a story of good and evil. This is not a story of black and white, although the ultra-Orthodox dress black and white, at least the men. It's a complex story. And it's important to understand this lifestyle based on this context. So when I was a child, we used to walk to shul on Shabbat. And it's about a half an hour walk from our house to the Satmar synagogue that was in Lakewood, New Jersey. We were living at the time. And we walked by this Reformed temple, and the parking lot was filled with cars, of course, and there was a designated reserved parking space for the rabbi, which also had a car in it. And I asked my father as a child, what kind of synagogue is this? Doesn't the rabbi know that you're not allowed to drive a car on Shabbat? And his answer was, these are not real Jews. Now, if we think about Jewish life today, there's approximately 15 million Jews in the world. How many of them are Orthodox? A minority of them. How many of them are ultra-Orthodox? Even a smaller minority. We're talking about somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people worldwide, with the majority in Israel and in the United States. There are some big communities in England, Antwerp, Australia, but the main big communities are in Israel and the United States. New York, New Jersey, some in Florida, some in California. And at least the Hasidic parts of them are the only people today that still speak Yiddish as their first language. Right? I technically grew up in the United States, New York, New Jersey, but English was my fourth language. I learned Yiddish, Hebrew, and Aramaic before I learned English. And I had to teach myself English as a teenager because in our school system, we had from the morning to the evening, at least like in the yeshiva, was from the morning from the evening, but even in the elementary school, we had only 1 hour a day non-religious studies. The rest was Torah, Chumash, Mishnah, Talmud. So in this hour, there's not much that you could pack in to learn. We learned a bit of history, but like very, very basic. We didn't know who Mozart was or who Einstein was. We learned maybe about George Washington. We learned a bit of math, very, very basic level math. Maybe a bit of English, like just the letters and some words. But of course, no biology, no scientific studies, nothing of that. We don't believe in that anyway, so it's irrelevant. Now, from the age of 13, 14, when we go to the first yeshiva, from then it's only religious studies from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. Now, the weird part about this whole studies is that it functions, not only the studies, but the whole community functions like a Eastern European shtetl in the 19th century. We barely had any tests at all. Like from the yeshiva years, we had 0 tests. We just would study all day, and if there was any testing process, it would be verbal. It would be oral test. There was never like a written test. So you finish studies without any certificate to show that you ever even did anything in your life. And then when I, years later, arrived in Berlin and tried to study Jewish studies in the university, they were forcing me to take like Introduction to the Bible and Aleph Bet Aramit, like Aramaic, like, and I was like, yeah. The professors knew the absurdity of it because one of my professors, the professor for Aramaic, said to me, "I'm quite certain you know Aramaic better than me, but we're in Germany and Germany has rules and we have to go through the list." One of the moments, for me this was a very long process. It was a process that took many, many years. I describe it as my own personal Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, because it's a cult-like mindset how this works. And a few years ago, when I found out that there is a possibility to visit North Korea, I said to myself, I have to visit North Korea. I set myself a goal to visit all the countries in the world, and as long as that's still a possibility, I have to do that. So I went with a friend of mine to North Korea. It is more or less what you imagine, with all the restrictions and fear. And like the first day, our tour guide literally told us, if you leave your hotel alone without somebody with you from us, we can't help you. What happens afterwards? But what I noticed there was this is what our community would look like if it were a country. The mindset, the control, the restrictions, the belief system. We were in a group with 10, 12 other people. And my friend that also grew up ultra-Orthodox, we noticed things that other people didn't even notice. Very small micro reactions to things, how they communicate with each other with like a small look and a blink. They have this mindset that the whole world is against them and they're the only true people in the world and everyone is jealous of them. The restrictions go to very technical things like kosher internet and kosher cell phones. That's something we grew up with, right? When the internet came out, the first thing was all the ultra-Orthodox rabbis were like, we're not allowing this at all. It's just not allowed in our communities. And then when it became very relevant for the workforce, people that work need it, they came up with kosher internet. This was actually one of my jobs in Israel. I was working in a kosher internet company, which basically is filtered internet with very strong restrictions. All the website, all the advertisements are all blocked out. Every person gets, for their own profession, only the website that they need for that profession. If you're a CPA, you get websites that you need for that work. If you're a travel agency, you get websites for that profession. You can't just go into Google and Google something or go into YouTube and look at a clip. It's all blocked. Kosher cell phones actually come with a stamp on it in Hebrew, and there are different standards of how kosher it is. My parents and my siblings have old flip phones with no text messages and no internet, and the only thing they could do is call and calculator and maybe alarm clock. That's all they have. We grew up without television, without internet, without radio, without any books that were not approved by our rabbis. So our books were either Hebrew or Yiddish, and even those, not like the early Zionistic Shalom Aleichem or something, that was not allowed. It was just only rabbinical stories, stories that teach us something, how to be better Jews, in our world at least. But I think that one of the most difficult parts for people leaving is that the whole world is only focused on one thing. Call it God, call it the rabbi, call it the community, but it's all around this one point. And when people leave the community, they lose their purpose in life. Because up to until now, the only reason to eat, sleep, work is only so you have strength to serve God. We were never asked as children, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what's your favorite color? Or what haircut do you want? These things are all irrelevant. There is one way that life has to go. Life is focused on one goal, and everything else is irrelevant, and it's even, I would say, a negative thing to think about it. The first time I was asked what my favorite color was when I was 35. I was working then in the liberal community in Basel, in Switzerland, and the CEO was preparing an apartment for me, and she said, "What's your favorite color?" And I said, I actually never thought about it. It's just something that's so not in our vocabulary to think about these earthy things, because we're only supposed to be busy with studying holy text all day. I mean, you could do good deeds and help people, that's also considered, but it's on the hierarchy of good deeds, it's less than sitting and studying Torah all day. Often when I talk about the ultra-Orthodox community, it comes across very negative, especially in comparison to the Western society. And I was once giving a talk in the Jewish community in Zurich, in Switzerland, and this Orthodox woman stands up and says to me, "Why do you never talk about the nice things that happen in the community? Why do you only focus on the negative parts? And there's so many chesed, helping each other going on, there's so many things." And I said to her, "Look, I left that community. I live a different life now. The community hasn't hired me to do the PR. Everything I said is factually correct. If it bothers you, then change it." Now, the way the community works is not only do they help each other out, this is an international network of, just recently, there was a YouTuber that went into Kiryas Joel, the same YouTuber that was in Minnesota, went into Kiryas Joel, on paper one of the poorest cities in the United States. And when you go into the city, you see everyone's driving on Jeeps and living in villas, and everyone buys food in the supermarket with food stamps. So it doesn't really add up. So he was basically walking around the street there and asking people what they do for a living. And of course, they're all running away from him. They don't like cameras. They don't like to answer these questions. Many people work off the books there, of course. But within days, everyone in America, in the ultra-Orthodox world, living in Muncie, living in Lakewood, living in California, knew about it and were informed by the rabbis, there's someone walking around with a camera now, be careful, don't talk to him, he's looking to make us look bad. So it's a very tight community. I could walk into someone's house, a small apartment in Bnei Brak in Israel, give him $100,000 cash. He will give me a small green paper where he'll write his signature on it, and the same day you could pick up the money in New York in cash without going through any bank system ever. It's a different mindset. Nobody thinks that they're doing something illegal here. Nobody thinks that it's irrelevant what the government thinks or says or does. Even the Israeli government, which in our community is the enemy, because Jews are not allowed to take back the land of Israel by force. And as long as the state of Israel exists, the Mashiach, the Messiah, can't come. So we used to protest against the state of Israel in Manhattan, across the street from the Israeli consulate there, against the state of Israel. So this 19th century shtetl mindset is something that on the one hand is very comforting, because there is someone in the community for every single issue that one has. Someone has a problem with the IRS, someone has a problem with the police, someone needs legal advice, someone needs medical advice, although this is one of the only known groups worldwide that have 0 doctors. There's like 0 ultra-Orthodox doctors, people who grew up ultra-Orthodox. There are people that grew up secular and then became ultra-Orthodox, they're doctors in the community. But most doctors are either non-Jewish or secular Jews. But there is someone in the community that could advise and has connections and knows people. And when somebody leaves the community, this whole network not only falls apart, this whole network turns against them. So, for instance, marriage, yeah? This is one of the most sex-segregated communities in the world. There is 0 connection between boys and girls from not only first grade, from kindergarten. There's separate kindergartens for boys and girls. And the only way to meet a partner is through a matchmaker. Now, the boys and girls that are getting married have very little to say in the process. It's mainly the families talking to each other, the parents meeting each other, making their financial agreements, making their personal agreements. When the boy and girl meet to get married, it's basically finalized. So when I met my ex-wife at the time, 3 times, that was like a lot. Like, And then the whole concept of marriage is something that these two people, these two individuals, are not individuals that are supposed to like each other, love each other, or even get along with each other. These two people are partners in a business to create more babies. That's the mindset. And as long as these two partners are not fighting with each other, life goes on. He stays with his friends, she stays with her friends, if she can, after having 18 kids. But, I mean, my mother is the oldest of 18. I'm the oldest of 11. These are big families. My great-grandmother died a few years ago by the age of 99. She had over 1,000 descendants. I don't know my first cousins. I will meet them on the street, wouldn't know who they are. This, of course, is also a Holocaust reaction, right? My grandparents were in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Theresienstadt. And one of the reactions were we have to create more Jews very fast. And I think this is also an important aspect, especially from a liberal point of view. We have to understand, although the ultra-Orthodox Jews claim to be the original Jews, and if you look at old pictures from the shtetl in Europe, they look very similar. The way they practice their Judaism is very different to what it was. Ultra-Orthodox Judaism is a new invention post-World War II. It's not a Judaism that existed before. There was never in Jewish history 50,000 working-age men, like in Israel, that are exempt from the army because they're only studying Torah and not working. There was never a time in Jewish history that existed. This is a new invention. The system, how the rabbis have control about every aspect of Jewish life, this is something that we can see in shutim, responses from throughout Jewish history. There's something very fascinating about reading these older texts from the Middle Ages, where rabbis are asked questions from all over the world, and they answer. And of course, today it's used as an halachic text to learn from it something that's relevant for us for today, or how the halacha formed itself. But there's a very important sociological aspect of it, that it shows us how Jews lived around the world and what problems they were dealing with, and often how they're not really keeping the rules. Jews are not religious throughout most history, not religious in the ultra-Orthodox sense how they portray it today. So I think the liberal way of Judaism, how we keep the text alive and the traditions alive, and we interpret it new based on our current state of values in the 21st century, is actually the truer Jewish tradition and Jewish thought process that was throughout Jewish history. But anyway, just to finish off with how I ended up in non-Orthodox Judaism, I came to Berlin in 2014. I said to myself, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. I knew only one kind of Judaism, and I knew that this is not the way I want to live my life. I don't want to be constantly in this prison where everything is decided for me, and the smallest transgression of wearing a shirt that's not white or having a different haircut gets you shunned from the community. So I decided to go to Berlin because at the time I was married, I had 3 kids, and I knew, I looked around and I saw that all my friends that left the community, literally all of them, the community saw to it that they were disconnected from their kids. And every time, till today, when one partner leaves the community and they fight either for custody or for visitation rights, the community gets together and puts together enormous amount of money with the best lawyers and connections and corrupt judges to do whatever they can, either to totally disconnect the children from the parent that left the community, or at least to minimize it and make them look very bad and make it very hard for them to have any relationship with their kids. So I thought to myself, I don't like Israel anymore. I lived there for 10 years. Whoever's lived in Israel knows financially, could be better. Politically, could definitely be better. And there's no reason to stay for my kids, because if I stay in Israel, the chance of me having any relationship with them is very, very slim. So I decided, let me go to Berlin, let me study. I went to study Jewish studies, actually. And I think the distance is actually what enabled me to have a certain relationship with my kids, because I wasn't present the whole time. I wasn't there the whole time. I'd come every few months, visit them, talk on the phone, so we could keep some relationship. And then a few years later, when they grew up, my 16-year-old daughter at the time got herself a lawyer on her own, went to court, and asked the judge that she wants to come to Germany to me. She was, within 2 months, she was in Germany. It was a very fast process because she's 16, she's old enough. And now she lived by us in Germany for 2 years. Later her younger sister came, who is still living with us. My older daughter went back to Israel a year ago, where she started studying law, and she has a boyfriend, and she's living somewhere like in between Flexodox and somewhere in between, but she has the ability to choose her own Judaism. And that's something I think is very important. When we talk about Judaism, Flexodox is a concept that I just invented, I don't know. It's not Orthodox, but it's not something else. Yes. Conservadox, but she's not conservative. She's very liberal. Nobody has a monopoly on Judaism. Nobody has a monopoly on right and wrong. These are human concepts that evolve with time. A few hundred years ago, or even less than a few hundred years ago in the United States, it wasn't only perfectly moral to have slaves, to own another human being. America went to war to prevent taking away the slaves. We grew up with the belief that because the Bible says, Ham, the son from Noach, after the story with, after the flood, Eved avadim yeh le'echav. Ham will be a slave to his brothers. The reason why Abraham Lincoln was shot was a punishment from God because he freed the slaves against God's will. That's what we grew up with. So, when we think about the future, I think that especially religions who all have a violent history, if religion has a justification to exist today in the 21st century, it's only to do good and only to learn out of our traditions and out of our texts. What can we learn from it? We're not going to accept all of it. There are certain texts that we have in our holy scrolls that we categorically disregard or that we categorically disagree with. They're still our holy texts, and we can still learn something from it. And we should take our traditions, which is thousands of years old, and brings real value into our lives, and see how we can do good from it, how we can learn from it to make the world every day a little better place. And may we all merit to have our own Yetziat Mitzrayim from whatever's holding us back, and leave our own Egypt. And have a wonderful Shabbat.